So now I'm excited to bring to the front of the room Dr. Rob Davies. Rob is a physicist and an educator who has served as an officer and meteorologist in the U.S. Air Force, worked for NASA on the International Space Station project, and taught on the faculty of 3 universities. He's now at Utah State. The scientific work has included research into interactions of spacecraft with the space environment, the fundamental nature of light and information, and Earth's changing climate. For the past decade, Rob's work has focused on communicating the critical science of climate change and sustainable systems. And of course, as I said earlier, it was the Rising Tide Crossroads project is Rob's brainchild. So I'm excited to hear from Rob today. Are you ready, Rob? Let's welcome Rob.
So the question on what do you do instead of the green lawns, I just pulled up. This is Rebecca and I's lawn. This is our cat. But it turns out there's all kinds of great options, and they're kind of amazing. And we use very little water in taking care of this in the desert. There's another picture. There's our solar panels over there. And this is not what it looks like right now. This was the spring right now. Anything that's green, just make it brown. So, well, first of all, thank you again for hosting us. This is just amazing. And I just, after Jason's presentation, I just want to say that I kind of want to be Jason when I grow up. What you are accomplishing at IU is what we're in the very early stages at USU of trying to create. And Jason made a very compelling case for combining the humanities and the sciences. I often phrase it as the natural sciences, the social sciences, the fine arts, and the humanities. And I'll just say it. So what I want to talk about is this notion of the Anthropocene and a kind of a holistic framework. So as I'm actually doing what Jason just said, I'm just going to make this super global as opposed to the very local, which is ultimately where we want to go. But from the very global picture, to my mind, this grand challenge that we're facing of meeting our absolute unsustainability as a society, which is true on a scale of decades, if that, is this. Humans are now the single largest force for change on the surface of the planet. That's the notion of the Anthropocene. We'll come back to that in just a moment. This impact is arising from the systems that we have created to do things for us. And we'll come back to that too. And these systems aren't producing this impact on purpose. We didn't design them to do that. It's an emergent phenomena of these systems, and it's destroying our life support system. So the question, so in the world of systems thinking, if you want to change the output of what a system does, there are different levers you can pull, and the further down you go in the foundation of the system, is there a problem, Rebecca?
It's just a little hard to hear you. Do you have a mic that's on?
It is.
It's only for the recording.
Got it.
I'll just speak up.
Okay.
There is one at the podium.
I'll just speak up. And please stick your hand up if I'm still not being heard. Okay, so the further you go down you go in the foundation of a system, the bigger change you can affect. Now in physics, that would be the fundamental laws of physics. So changing things like big G and Newton's law of gravitation, the gravitational constant. Now we can't change that, but if we could, that would be a big lever to pull on how the universe behaves. But in human systems, the axioms are not fundamental laws. For example, our food system is not designed to produce food. It's designed to produce profit. And so that's an axiom. And then everything flows from there. And so if you change the axiom, let's design it to produce, let's say, maximum human health, then then that system will behave differently. So I guess what I'm getting at is the systems are impacting the planet. It's the systems that need to transform. Where did these systems come from? They came from our culture. They came from what we choose to value. And so the biggest levers to pull are the cultural levers. And that's kind of, in my mind, and many people who work in this field of sustainable systems, transforming, maybe a better word is evolving our culture is the biggest, that's the trick. We don't need new knowledge, scientific knowledge, or technology to do these things. We have what we need. We'll get more, and that'll even help. But the trick is the culture, and oftentimes the example gets used is weight loss. Most of us will probably try to figure out weight loss at some time in our lives. It's no mystery. Scientifically, we know how to lose weight. The challenge, of course, is changing our lifestyles, our culture. And that's the whole trick, right? That's the big problem. And that's also the case writ large in building a sustainable system. So what I want to go through with you right now is just kind of a framework for thinking about these things. And I'll make clear why I think this framework is so powerful. It's only come about in just the last decade, less than a decade, that lots of ideas that have been synthesizing for a half a century or more are now sort of getting put together in a very coherent framework for us as a society to start to look at it. So it's called the Planetary Boundaries Framework. The idea is trying to create for ourselves a safe, a sustainable, a just, and a vibrant human presence on the planet. And all of these are necessary because, and I forgot to put this in, but one can imagine lots of sustainable states for humans on the planet, many of which are not pleasant, but they're sustainable. So we don't just want sustainable, we want vibrant, which I think implies safe and just. So that's the framework, and here it is. I'm back. So I gave this quote last night in the performance. I'll just let you read it. I mean, you don't have to have a degree in earth science to read that and say, that doesn't sound good. And this is motivation, right? This term Anthropocene has been proposed, as Jason said, by the world's geologists because humans are now the single largest driver of change on the surface of the Earth. It's actually being applied as a geologic epoch, I think is what they're calling it. So what is this? So, and I mentioned last night in the performance, it's replacing the Holocene. Just to orient you, here's a temperature record going back about 800,000 years, inferred from looking at ice cores pulled up out of Antarctica. And Jason, you weren't even close to the only two historians at the AGU. Climate scientists are historians. This is a temperature record of the planet going back nearly 1 million years. You see, the planet kind of likes to be cold, mostly. And these short little pops up here are the interglacial periods. And here's the Holocene. This is where we are. This is the last about 12,000 years right here. That's about a global average temperature difference of 12 degrees Fahrenheit. To go from here to here took about 12,000 years. And humans come on the scene, by the way, anthropologists tell us right about here, 200,000 years ago, plus or minus 50,000 maybe. But this is our environment. And most of that time has been quite cold, the glacial periods. The interglacials are not very long-lived. And the one we've been in has actually been unusually long-lived. And we understand why that is. I won't go into it. But human civilization starts at the beginning of the Holocene with a stable climate, when you can reliably grow food in certain places and reliably have a community here that doesn't, where the sea levels don't change. So this is the Holocene, the last 10 or 15,000 years, and it's been really remarkably stable. And that's what's changing. This is where human civilization is built, and to which human civilization is very finely adapted. We're very finely tuned to this. So changing it in a big way, which we are doing, is not likely to be good for human civilization. We've adapted it so tightly to these conditions. So that's the Holocene that is now turning into, this is being destabilized. We're moving to a new climate. That's the notion of the Anthropocene. So there's a framework for talking about this notion. So specifically, what environmental conditions, for example, are necessary for human civilization to thrive, and how do we quantify them? There's the framework. If you're looking at that and thinking this, congratulations, you're looking at that correctly. So this is where we're going to end up. I'm going to get rid of it, and we're going to build it up so we understand this framework. This is where we start as humans in the universe. Well, we can't survive here. So we need this place. And this place provides a place for us to survive. And we often think of the environmental parameters that are necessary for human survival. This is the framework, is to think of those parameters as something like an ecological ceiling that kind of protects us from the rest of the universe. And that ecological ceiling then is different pieces of the environment. Now, I've listed some things there. I think you can all relate those to the environment. It's not important that we get into the details of them. These are aspects of the atmosphere, air, ozone, air often meaning pollution in the air, life, biodiversity, land systems, forest, water systems, fresh water, ocean, and a couple of other things to do with the environment, the chemical environment that we're in, and in particular nutrient flows, and often we focus on phosphorus and nitrogen, Jason mentioned. But we don't have to worry about the details, but hopefully these seem plausible to you as important to providing us a stable place to live. And the idea then is that taken together, these form this ecological ceiling. And the question is, how much can we disturb these different things about our environment and still hope to preserve a stable, livable climate for ourselves? So that's the trick in all of this, is figuring out, well, what is the actual measure of biodiversity? What is the measure of climate? What is the measure of nutrient flows, and et cetera? And that's the details of the science that many, many neuroscientists work on. And then, of course, the next trick is, okay, what are the actual metrics? So in the case of climate, for example, it's carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere and something called radiative balance, which is just how much energy is coming in versus how much energy is leaving the planet. And then, not just figuring out what the metrics are, figuring out what they are right now, and figuring out how much can we disturb them and still be kind of okay. So that's the details of the science that goes into this planetary boundaries framework. But the big picture is that we don't want to just survive. We want to thrive. And so to do that, we build up for ourselves a social foundation. We build up for ourselves stable access to water, clean water, and enough water. Food, housing, shelter, energy, to do the things we want to do. And these are sort of basics, right? And then we want to get a little bit better. We want education, we want health, we don't just want to survive, we want to thrive. We want things like a peaceful society, vibrant income and work, social equity, community, political voice, gender equity, all of these things that then take a place and make it not just that we're living from day to day, but that we're vibrant and thriving. So we build this social foundation for ourselves. And in this framework, the space sort of between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling we refer to as this sustainable, safe, just, vibrant place for humans to exist. Hopefully the idea is this is what we want for all humans. And I think maybe there are some people who would argue that's not what we want, but I don't think most people And what's happened, of course, is as we build this social foundation, we have to chew into our resources. We disturb the environment. So as you build the social foundation, you disrupt the climate. You disrupt the various things about the atmosphere, about the water system, about the land systems. All of these things get changed. And as I said, the question is, how much can you change them and still hope to maintain this stable Holocene-like state that we have arisen in and constructed for ourselves? Well, if you try to quantify all of these things, which the scientists have done, you can kind of think of it as the green zone, you know, and the safe zone, the sort of approaching danger zone, and then the, man, we've blown through it and this is really bad zone. So in the green areas, these are places where we're doing okay. We've disturbed the environment, but probably not enough that's not sustainable yet. The orange and yellow, well, now we're getting closer to the danger zone. Climate, for example, we're getting very close to the, this is absolutely not sustainable. Same thing with changes to the ocean system as measured by ocean acidification. A couple of things. How much can you pollute the air, and how much can you change the chemical environment that we're in? The community hasn't really even figured out what the metrics are yet, but it seems like they're important. For example, 80 or 100,000 synthetic chemical species ubiquitous in our environment now that were not here when we evolved. And what does that do to our bodies and to the living systems, our ecosystems? But there are a couple where we have absolutely blown through what, to the best of science's ability to understand, is a safe zone. In other words, if we continue at this rate, we will destroy our livable environment. And the two that we've blown through the natural barriers are nutrient loading. So this is how much phosphorus and nitrogen is cycling through the biosphere. Now on an order of magnitude, 10 times or more greater than the natural flows. And this is producing all kinds of havoc. This is raising all kinds of havoc in the ecosystem, in the biosphere. And the second one, where we know that we've just blown through all sense of safety, is biodiversity. So how many, and then there are kind of two categories of this, how many different kinds of species do we have, and how quickly are they going extinct? And also, so that's what you would call genetic diversity, but then there's also functional diversity, which is you might still have a species. It may not have gone particularly extinct, but its population numbers are so low now that it can't really fulfill its role in the ecosystem. And the ecologists tell us that species are now going extinct at a rate of between 500 and 1,000 times the natural background rate. They're calling it the 6th grade extinction event. We're losing somewhere between 20 and 200 species on this planet every single day. And there is no interpretation of ecology that says we think we can continue to do this for very long. We are immersed in this biosphere. It does everything for us. And the species, we don't even know what most of the species do for us. And we're just sort of tossing them out. So that's the risk management notion. Okay, so certainly if you're an Earth system scientist, you can see where lots of the work is to be done right now. In all of it, every facet of the Earth system. Well, okay, so we've punched holes in the ecological ceiling. And along the way, we actually haven't done a very good job of building up a social foundation. In this framework, there are, just like there are 11 or so metrics for the ecological ceiling, there are roughly 20 or so metrics for the health of the social foundation that the social scientists have come up with. And I've kind of grouped some of them together to fit it all on here. But you get the idea. And if you look at it from a global situation, sort of global population, not everybody has access to fresh water. Not everybody has access to nutritious food or sufficient calories. Not everybody has access to basic health care, to basic education, to a safe political environment, et cetera, et cetera. So everything in red represents people living in critical human deprivation, some level of critical human deprivation. About 2 billion people on the planet currently live in some level of critical human deprivation. So, to recap, we have built up a fairly crappy social foundation and in the process punched huge holes in our ecological ceiling. And our plan to fill in the red here, to build up a full social foundation for the planet, is to accelerate the destruction of our environment, growth, right? This is not going to work. Long before we fill in these gaps, we will have collapsed huge pieces of our life support system. And then, you know, the areas in red get bigger, not smaller. At the moment, what you'll hear about in the news is economic growth. We need economic growth to provide jobs, to, you know, build wealth, a rising tide lifts all boats, you know, if you have a boat. If you don't, you just drown. So the notion is that that's not going to work. What we actually have right now is not economic growth. What we have is uneconomic growth. At this point, every additional hole we punch in the ecological ceiling makes life worse, not better, on a global scale. Now, of course, we know that on the local scale, we can build up certain populations. But as we build up the comfort of certain populations, most of us in this room, we're taken away from somebody at this stage. So the challenge here, I think this is where I'm at. The challenge here, of course, is to do this. This is our task. This is our raison d'etre. From here on out, fill in the social foundation and bring ourselves back to within ecological limits, within the planetary boundaries. That's our task. And what I love about this framework now, that we've built it up, and you get a sense of it, what I love about this framework is that whoever you are, whatever your interests, whether they're environmental, or scientific, social scientific, or humanities or fine arts, and if you could read these, you can find a place for you here. There's work for anyone to do here, and you don't have to change your life's interests. You can do it from within your day job, so to speak. So I think this is, and what you'll notice is a huge fraction of it is in the social sciences and the humanities, and the fine arts. And so I am certainly guilty of what Jason mentioned about bringing together the humanities in particular into this discussion in a very interdisciplinary, hopefully even transdisciplinary way. One reason I'm really interested in doing that is to tell the story, because so what you've just seen is as a species, as a global society, as a global civilization, we have this knowledge now. We now understand that this is our situation as a species, but most of us within this species don't understand this. So we've had this really big dynamic mismatch between the creation of knowledge and social learning. So certainly our purpose in the Crossroads project really was about addressing that aspect, helping people better understand this, and telling the story in a way that reaches us, that connects us to this information, not just intellectually, but emotionally, so we can start to feel, what does this mean? For me and for others, that's what storytelling of the kind of the performance last night, that's what we seek to do, certainly. So this is, in that sense that Jason mentioned, the arts in service to communication in this case. And that was understood going into this. That's not the only reason for the arts, but it's one thing the arts can do really well. And so that shared goal between myself, the scientist, and various artists that were part of our collaboration, that shared goal helped us make the decisions that we made in putting together the performance. It wasn't purely an art project. It was an art project seeking to accomplish a particular thing, and so that helped. But of course, there's far more to it. As Jason made brilliantly clear in his, there's the storytelling part to connect us to the information, but there's also the part of we have to now imagine what does a sustainable, safe, just, vibrant human state on this planet look like in its detail. So if I got together a bunch of physicists and engineers and asked them that question, they'd lay out for me, well, you've got your solar panels and your wind and maybe your fusion reactor, and you've got your hydroponic farming, and here's what the buildings, their energy efficiency and the transportation, it's all electric cars or who knows what. They're going to give me that. It doesn't tell me anything about what the lawns look like, what we're eating, how we're entertaining ourselves, how we're situating ourselves just spatially. So right now we have these great distances between our families and us, many of us. And we did that because we thought, oh, I can just hop on an airplane and we'll go visit. Is that really part of can we still do that in a truly sustainable, vibrant society? It's not clear. So there are all these cultural aspects that have to evolve, and our systems are not going to change until those cultural things. Our diet isn't going to change until we've decided this is how I'm going to live. And this is what I'm going to value. And so that's the necessity in my mind of bringing the humanities in. We have to evolve the culture, and we have to have people in that discussion who spend time thinking about that. So I don't want just physicists and engineers in that discussion. I want historians. I want philosophers. I want communicators. I want economists and entrepreneurs. All of that is going to have to fit into a culture, and we have to envision what that looks like. Then we have to envision what does a path, so here's where we are. Here's where we're going to go. We've tried to envision what this looks like. Now we have to imagine a trajectory, a pathway that takes us there. What does that look like? And we have to envision how to evolve our culture so to put us on that pathway. So these sort of three big envisioning projects, what does the future state look like? What does the pathway there look like, or various pathways? And how do we get on those pathways? Primarily involve, I would say, the social sciences and humanities, to include the fine arts. And a lot of that is storytelling, but a lot of that is also just envisioning. What does it look like? So this is the framework that I sort of start with. I've constructed a class for fine arts students around this at Utah State University at the request of the King College of the Arts, which also houses the Fry Street Quartet. I often say, we taught it once now, last spring semester. We'll teach it again this coming spring semester. And I often say, not jokingly, that in my view, some of the students on the campus who have the best grasp on what the notion of human sustainability is are in the College of the Arts. I would say even more complete than the College of the Natural Resources at this moment. And now we're trying to design a curriculum program that will reach many, many more students at USU in combining the sciences, the humanities, the fine arts, in a sort of a package. But of course, the challenge of that, and I'm sure, Jason, you've seen this, is that universities are terrible at interdisciplinary. It's not that they want to be, but the system is constructed that way. And so there's a lot of work just trying to figure out how do we need to change university administrative framework in order to better facilitate this kind of work. And universities are working at it. My position is an example of it at Utah State University. And it's one example. There are others at USU. But it's still kind of hard. because you end up with department heads fighting about who's paying for this person's time, and who's got a teaching buyout over here, et cetera, et cetera. All that needs to be figured out, and that's kind of the work in the weeds at the moment. We're working on that as well. Sounds like you've made more progress, so I'm going to be talking to you more about that. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Maybe one just, okay. Yeah, I'll put this up. It's a little provocative.
Amen.
So there's that too. All right. Thank you. And
Thank
I
you,
know we're out
Rob.
of time.
I think we have time for a couple questions. Do you want to bring the lights up? And then,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
I think one thing that I was struck by in both of your talks was the whole idea of these systems and the interactivity of the system. And something that you said, Rob, early on really stuck with me, and as you went through your chart, and it relates back to Jason, it really hit me. You said, and I just want to share, you said, our food system is not designed to produce food. It's designed to produce profit. And I think that in a certain level, the thing that's missing from all of this conversation is about that economic value system that underlies all the problems. Because if, in fact, it's not the systems that are at fault, it's the values that underlie the systems where greed and profit is the value. So once we change that, and then that's the long arc of human problems.
That's the cultural evolution.
That's the cultural evolution, which
Yeah.
is if profit becomes the value, and it is the value, which is why the missing link in all the work that we've all been talking about is sort of the business community. Because that's where the rubber meets the road. It's well, we're not going to sacrifice the profit for the shareholders, so we won't do this project that's good for the environment or good for education or good for health, because our value will go down by 2 cents on every dollar we invest, and then we don't have a good financial report. And I think that this kind of work that we're all engaged in, if we don't figure out how to engage the business community and the decision makers in business, which is more powerful on some levels than government, which is in service to business, we're going to lose.
So,
I'm
absolutely.
not sure that was clear.
No,
but
so the point is that, Laura's, just to restate, is that the business community, business needs to be sort of a piece of this discussion, because at the moment they're setting the profit is the value, because that's what we get out of it. I would argue that the systems are the problem, because if you change that underlying motivation, that underlying value, what we choose to value, that changes the system that you get. That changes the way businesses operate. So you end up, and a lot of people are thinking about this, and in particular, here's a name some of you may have heard, many of you may not have. Kate Raworth, R-A-W-O-R-T-H. She's an economist. And the notion is completely reforming our notion of a growth-based what's called a neoliberal economic system, right? So if you start with a neoliberal economic system where growth is required for it to prosper, if it doesn't grow, it's not prospering and people suffer. It's not the only economic model. There's a whole discipline of economics called steady state economics, sometimes ecological economics, which is different than environmental economics, which is just monetizing stuff like air. What's it worth? That seeks to look at how we organize ourselves in with very different principles, recognizing fully that the human economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. And the problem, of course, we've got is that the human economy used to be, the measure of material and energy flow used to be very small relative to the biosphere. Now it's huge relative to the biosphere, so much for that it's disrupting it dramatically. So there's a lot of work on what does a steady state economic system look like? And when you ask that question, so Kate Raworth's book is called Donut Economics. It's a wonderful synthesis of a lot of work that's come before her, but very digestible. And what does it look like, and how does that change things? And so, for example, Laura, your example of the business community. Well, one way it changes things is that businesses no longer organize themselves, articles of incorporation, such that the prime directive by law is to serve the shareholder. It's not just that the insurance companies who won't cover your cancer treatment are evil. They're actually following the law. Their goal is not to produce healthy people or pay for our medical treatments. Their goal is to make money. That's it. And if they can legally get away with denying treatments and all of that sort of stuff, that's what they sort of have to do, usually by their articles of incorporation, by law. And so if you go to a different economic system, and there are different business models like B corporations, benefit corporations, that increasingly more corporations are organizing themselves by, where they don't incorporate themselves to maximize profit for shareholder. Here in the United States, right here in this part of the United States, nature's Organic Valley. You've seen this brand? This is a B corporation. In their articles of incorporation, their prime directive is to serve their producers, to provide a good living for their producers. The second one is to provide great quality, healthy products for their customers. And they have nowhere are they trying to make money for shareholders. You can invest in them, and they'll say, you give us this money, we'll give you X% in return, that's what you get. We're not going to try to maximize that, just what you get. And so there's a way to organize, that now changes the whole, starts to change the whole system. So that's absolutely right. And I have a question. It's never clear where to put business and economics in the academic. Is it a humanity? Is it a science? The economists like to think of themselves as a science. People like Kate Rayworth will say, no way, it's a humanity. What is the answer? What do we think of a business school? Where does that fall?
Well, I don't have an answer for that, but one of the comments that I would have is just what you articulated, just what you had to say. And I think that in our conversation about the holistic approach here also has to include this kind of conversation, how we connect the dots in regards to how this affects people's daily lives. When we're talking about the household aspect, people of Flint can tell you that, certainly in terms of what's happened to them. And I think we have to ask everyone for more transparency, and also for a change in our language about value, as well as what you just had to say about shareholders, the systems that exist, and for all of us to participate in that conversation, regardless of whether we're talking about sciences or the humanities, whether we're educators or whether we're neighbors, whatever our group of people are, I think that has to be part of our conversation.
So that's a great comment, and I would say, I'm certain this is what's going on with Jason. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but certainly what Jason is accomplishing in his program, and what we hope to accomplish by creating a whole program of study for undergraduates at USU, is that an engineering major or an economics major or a business major or a history major can come out of their undergraduate experience with a much more holistic vocabulary to talk about these things with, because they've been, for 4 years, having these conversations with each other and with faculty. Because right now, the faculty don't even know how to talk to each other. We're learning. But we can't wait for a generation, for our students, to kind of start to figure this out. And they need to come out of their undergraduate experience already thinking about things in this very holistic way, where the physicist is already thinking about what does the lawn look like and what's the purpose of this business, and vice versa, where the business major comes out already thinking, how is this going to affect the climate? How is this going to affect our nutrient loading, et cetera, et cetera? We want to come up with solutions to the pieces of this that don't exacerbate other pieces, but instead synergistically help other pieces. But you can't do that. You can't come up with a synergistic piece here that helps these things if you don't know about these things, and you don't have the language to talk about it. So I think you're exactly right. And that's hopefully the purpose of this transdisciplinary approach to the curriculum, to get the students to come out with that vocabulary already in their heads. Sir.
So you talked about imagining what the future could be, and that's one of the things I like about sci-fi is that that's kind of like part of it, but there's a lot of like technological BS that comes with sci-fi too that I don't really care about. But so much of it is dystopian. Like Firefly, a very popular television series, had like for a brief moment, I think in the intro episode, talking about a mass migration of humanity away from Earth to a new system. I talked about Earth that was. You see it for just a moment, it's brown.
Yeah.
The entire planet is. Cloud Atlas, the book, had one of the sequences was talking about these dead zones across Earth in our next 5 to 1,000 years. It's like, what literature out there has some sort of positive vision for what Earth could be in the future?
So I'm actually going to put that question to the audience, but before I do, I'd like to say absolutely. And this is why one of my primary focuses for the last 5-6 years has been educating fine arts students. I get invitations to talk to grade schools all the time. Well, not so much anymore because I always say no. But I used to get a lot. But I would always say no because I had no idea how to tell this story to third graders. But I'm happy to tell the story to their teachers. And their teachers will figure out how to tell it to the third graders. And so I'm kind of using the same idea. I want to tell this story to you as a filmmaker, as a writer, as an artist, as a storyteller, and let you figure out how to tell the right story. And you're right, Mad Max, blah, blah, blah. There are all these dystopic things. And this is the beauty of, right now I spent the summer working with playwrights and artistic directors at theaters. Theater in the age of climate change. Chantal Dilladieu in New York has been really driving this among her community of theater. Because isn't that what's great is you get to walk into a performance and something that we should not be eating meat. Meat is a huge drain on the way that we do meat is a huge impact on the planet. And then someone will say, well, that's just not realistic. You're never going to get that culture to change. But you get to walk into a play where maybe that's just a feature of the society in the play, and maybe they don't even make a big deal about it. It just comes out in the play or in the movie or in the story that that's just the way they are. You kind of get to try on that reality for the duration of that story. And maybe you come out of it if it's done well, saying, that was okay. That doesn't. There's this great movie, Starship Troopers. Robert, well, ostensibly based on the Robert Heinlein novel, has nothing to do with the Robert Heinlein novel, and it's kind of a fun romp. But what I like about it, and it's about fighting space aliens and space bugs and blah, blah, blah. But just as a piece of it, you go through basic training with some of these Army recruits that are just out of high school. And in one scene, they're going into the showers after their training. And it's, first of all, it's men and women are all the recruits, and they're pretty equal in numbers. And in the showers, it's men and women. They're all showered, a big communal shower, and they're having conversations, and it's kind of funny. And it's just normal. It's not weird, it's not sexual, it's not anything. And they just slip this thing in about, imagine a society where this was true. And you get to try it on for a little while. It's got nothing to do with the whole story, but it's just they build a whole, that's the power of the storytelling. And we really need it because we've got to change our culture. We've got to envision ourselves in that culture. And story and these kinds of things, I agree, is how we do it. Does anybody have any recommendations for, what's your name? Orion. Does any, future novels that have really positive views?
We have a young adult author right here.
This afternoon, I'll show you all of them.
I just want to comment. I went to a conference a few years ago, actually a while ago now, and it was Frederick Jameson, the theorist, Stanley Robinson, the sci-fi writer, and there was an economist there. And the conference was for Frederick Jameson, and it was called Utopia. And Jameson talks quite a bit about how utopia is nothing we can ever reach. It's only something we imagine. But it was such an interesting combination of these different disciplines coming together to speak about this idea of utopia. But I
participating in this. So, yeah, it's just, you know, it's just making me think about all these different places and conferences I've been to where people are having conversations, like what you're doing.
Yeah. And we just need more. We need so much more, less dystopia. What does it actually look like? And I'll throw out Star Trek. The whole Star Trek world is, you know, especially the next generation, you know.
It kind of ruins life, real life though, because like humanity has gone through these horrible, you know, like there was a third world war and then mass starvation and warfare, and we solved all of our problems and everything's great. And now they're living in the great future, and like, well, how did you get there?
Right. So that's why I always include, not only do we have to envision where we want to be, because you don't plot a course, you gotta have a destination if you're gonna plot a course, right? But, okay, that's actually not so hard to imagine where you want to be. It requires more effort than we put into it, I think. But once you've got it, the real trick is to imagine, envision, what does the pathway look like, and how do we get on it? That's the big one. How do we evolve our culture into that direction?
Well, and that is part of this, the idea of systems. When you're thinking of systems theory or systems changing, think of like Ursula Le Guin's book, Dispossess. There's a whole different system that you could possibly imagine, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to